All right, so David Damore, decades in political science at UNLV. You've written extensively about Nevada politics, recently co-authoring a book about Latinos in Nevada. I saw you nodding your head several times throughout that interview. What stood out to you?
I think what stood out to me was this idea that Latinos are certain issue-based voters. They're not. They're responding to the political environment. You go back a decade, Democrats had done a really good job on the immigration issue to mobilize Latino vote, particularly in Nevada. Then they didn't deliver, right? Failure in 2013. We look at Latino turnout in 2014. Horrible across the board, but particularly bad in Nevada. Republican sweep here. Now you're seeing a response to the economic issues, which are salient for everyone here, and particularly this idea of education, small businesses being the ladder for economic mobility and upward mobility. And that's something very salient to Latino voters here. And if they're seeing policies that are obstructing that, that's going to be the response.
Jose, I saw you raise your eyebrows.
So I'm an immigrant. My parents are immigrants. I was born here, been in Nevada since 1970. So I can tell you from perspective, the Latino voting population has increased year after year after year. And so where there wasn't much attention being paid to the Latino vote, now there is. But the issues that the soccer moms I'm talking to, those soccer moms are talking to me about jobs and about education and about opportunity. And they don't necessarily place the blame. They want to know where the opportunity is and who's going to represent them. So my goal is to eventually to provide the information to the Latino population to make the right decisions, to help the Democratic Party continue to what they've been doing, which is to address some of the issues. Do they have a ways to go? Yes. Have they delivered? Absolutely. So the future is bright for Latinos in Southern Nevada, because now we're starting to make a difference in where we are in what we do. We have a Latino superintendent, Jesus Jara. We have a Latino president of CSN, and Federico Zaragoza. These two gentlemen are doing a great job in providing opportunities for the young Latinos. 47% of K-12 students are Latino. And by the way, Latino in Southern Nevada means 80% Mexican-American background. Those are the Latinos. And they're starting to make a difference, and which party delivers to them consistently is going to get their vote. They're no longer going to be fooled by mixed messages.
Which lends itself to the idea of a nonpartisan move. What do you think about that, John?
You know, it's hard to parse out. This is definitely a narrative that there has been some movement towards sort of nonpartisan identification among Latinos. I think as a social scientist, I want to see a little more data on that. I think on the issues, the most recent polling data suggests that inflation is the top issue in the last two polls of Latinos in Nevada. Jobs and the economy came in at number 2. I don't want to minimize the importance of small business owners in the Latino community, but it's a much more diverse community, and we know that the sectors that Latinos are employed in are still overwhelmingly in hospitality, in services, and then in construction. Those 3 sectors are booming right now. It's a very, very tight labor market. And to be sure, I think some Latinos are concerned about inflation and whether or not their wages are raising or increasing at the same rate as prices. But this is a very tight labor market right now, and it's one where workers have a lot of leverage. And so I think that is an issue that might potentially work in favor of Democrats in this election cycle. The other thing I would highlight is, you know, if you look at what most people spend money on, and Latinos and also others who are on somewhat fixed incomes, it's rent, it's gas, and then food. And the silver lining here, I think, is that gas prices have come down all across the valley. And this is something that you see when you're driving all the time. I mean, we wish that we had better public transportation, but most people are still driving. And I think the relief in gas prices is probably going to make a little bit of difference, I think, in the psychology of voters in this election cycle around inflation.
Frankie, what are you hearing, whether it be from Latina soccer moms or Latinos in general?
You know, it's very interesting because, adding on to what you were saying, so many of them are so concerned and they're paying attention to exactly what's happening. They're realizing that what they value is actually not being protected. They're coming out, it's important for jobs, it's important how much they're paying for food, how much they're paying for their mortgage, And they're not seeing any of that reflected in the policies that are coming from the Democrats. They're seeing, as they're now paying more attention, they're seeing that they're actually making it worse with the policies that they're choosing, instead of actually looking at what's going to be an actual productive policy that's going to help the entire nation, not just Nevada, actually move forward and get through this crisis that we're in. And along with education, I've been to so many school board meetings, I've been to rallies, and all of these parents, it's not just the soccer moms, they want to make sure that their kids are actually getting a strong education. They want to make sure that they're learning their mathematics, their English, their science, their biology, every important subject that they need to thrive as an adult when they enter the workforce. And that's not what they're seeing. That's not what is being reflected by the school board and the curriculum that's being offered to them. And they're seeing it as they're losing their parental rights to teach their kids what they really should be learning. And it's a cycle. If you're not getting the education you need, you cannot help the economy when you become an adult and actually enter the workforce as a strong employee.
Jose, how well, you want to add something to that?
Go ahead.
How well do you think Democrats have done at holding on to the Latino vote in Nevada?
So I think I want to start out by saying the Latinos are looking at issues that are important to their family, that are important to their future and their jobs and the opportunities for their kids. So I'll agree that is the case. But one thing that they're upset about and they haven't forgiven is when a presidential candidate walked down some escalators and said Mexico sends its worst, criminals, rapists, drug runners. They lost us. They lost the Latino vote right there and then for most of us who are paying attention. Because if you don't value us from where we come from, then you don't value us enough to include us in your leadership. And so what I want to talk about is, where is Hispanic leadership today? It's within the Democratic Party. We have the first Latina in the whole entire United States to serve in the Senate. That's a Latina in Nevada. Democrat. We have Lisa Cano, who's been appointed lieutenant governor. We have assemblywomen like Selena Torres. So we have much leadership within the Democratic Party. So we're part of that effort to help the community and to help ourselves. I don't see that on the other side. There is no Latinas in the Republican leadership in the party here in Nevada or Las Vegas.
Do you want to respond to that, Frankie?
I do, and the first thing that I want to respond to is this idea that, the former president said that all of these terrible people were coming across the border, and that was the representation of Latinos. And this is what's so frustrating to so many people on both sides, because they're realizing that so many things are being taken out of context. If you actually hear that entire speech and everything that he said, he's not referencing everyone in the Latino community. He's talking about the actual drug cartel that's coming in, the people that are bringing in drugs, the people that are coming in illegally. There's a fentanyl crisis happening at the border right now that isn't being spoken about, and this is killing our people. This is killing our children. There's sex trafficking happening, and these are the people that he's talking about. There's a difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration, because when you have it legally, you can do these background checks. You can make sure that these families are coming in safely. They're protecting the kids that are coming with them. When you have illegal immigration, it's completely open to all of these criminals that are coming in, and it's a very misleading piece of information to say that, because when you watch the full speech that he says, you can actually hear everything that he's saying.
I watched the full speech, and the reason many Republican friends that I have that are Latino left the Republican Party, because there's always an excuse for what he says. Or let me clarify this: when the leadership of the Republican Party doesn't respect us, and then they try to come back with, okay, well, you didn't listen to the whole speech, that's not what he meant. So we're being left behind within one party. The other party, can they do better? Absolutely. Can Democrats do better in addressing Latino issues and general community issues? Absolutely. But today, the party that's helping the most is the Democratic Party.
Will you expand on that, though? Because in our phone conversations, you had mentioned you thought that maybe Democrats had taken the Latino vote for granted a bit.
So yeah, in past elections, I've heard high-ranking officials say something like, well, why invest in the Latino vote when who are they going to vote for anyway? Well, that's the wrong attitude to take. What we need to take into account is what are the needs of our entire community? What are the needs of 30% of our community, which is Latino? And how can we meet our community needs? And how can Latinos be part of that conversation, whether they're Republicans or Democrats? How can we do better? That's what needs to be found out. And the party that does best in that is going to get the Latino vote, and they're going to win.
I want to be fair. Frankie, do you want to respond to that?
I do, and you are absolutely entitled to how you feel, but this is the problem. There is so much misdirection and misleading happening from the Democratic Party. This is why so many Latino families are so frustrated, because they don't trust information coming from anywhere. They don't trust information coming from politicians. They don't trust it from mainstream media, because they just want the truth. And if there was transparency, if there were clips of things, obviously no one is perfect, and we're not here to apologize, but we're here to make sure that the proper policies are put into place to keep our Americans safe.
John, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly that some recent focus groups that were done by Emerson College along with a poll showed that, there has definitely been damage done by Trump and the Republican Party to the perception about the party and its willingness to sort of do outreach and to represent the Latino community in a positive light. Among those people who said they were thinking about voting Republican or had in 2020, they clearly acknowledged that they were conflicted about it and that they were doing so only because of a perception that somehow the Republican Party or Trump might do a better job delivering on economic issues. But there was a clear acknowledgement of how conflicted they felt because of the incendiary rhetoric that the former president used. And I think, any candidate who has sort of tied himself closely or themselves to the former president, that is potentially a liability, because there's sort of a deficit there, I would argue, in terms of perceptions. All that negative rhetoric, I think, has had a really lasting influence, and that's what we see in focus groups and also in the polling data. One other point very quickly on education is that in the two most recent polls, it's clear that the vast majority of Latinos trust Democrats more than Republicans on education issues, a whole range of them.
All right, and as we did mention, there are two Nevada races that have grabbed national attention this election cycle. In the race for governor, Democrat Steve Sisolak is the incumbent against Republican challenger and Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo. The latest polls, according to polling aggregation website 538, show Sisolak receiving 44.8% of the vote, with Lombardo receiving 42.7%. And in the race for U.S. Senate, Democratic incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto faces Republican challenger and former Nevada Attorney General Adam Laxalt. 538 shows Cortez Masto receiving 45.4% of the vote in that race, with Laxalt receiving 41.7%. So it is close. How crucial, in your opinion, David, will the Latino vote be in Nevada this November?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're going to have races that come down at a couple points. And so I think the sort of understated point of this is there is a lot of mobilization that can still occur. And you look at the rules, and Nevada has very, very liberal voting laws. So polling's great, but people can show up on election day, register and vote. And we saw that last time, and the Republicans actually did a nice job with that. That's how they ended up flipping the Senate seat in Green Valley, was all that late voting. So there's this, Nevada is, despite all its tension, there's less than expected political participation. So there's enough, both parties have the opportunity to make the electorate bigger, and Latino votes are a big part of that story.
I wanted to get to needs. Everybody here mentioned jobs, economy, education as issues that are on the forefront, at the forefront of the Latino voters' minds. But those are issues that impact everybody, regardless of race and ethnicity. What are some of the issues that have historically defined the Latino voting population, and how important are those issues now? Frankie, I'll start with you.
I think one of the biggest things is our Christian values. We feel that they're being attacked, they're being villainized. The fact that we, as Christians, you're going to naturally have more conservative values. And I think that's what a lot of these families are noticing, that the values that the Democratic Party is more focused on don't actually line up with our natural Latino values as Christians, as being pro-family, being pro-marriage, being pro-life. And a lot of these things are being vilified and being attacked, and it's making us feel like everything that we grew up with and what we value most is no longer valued.
I want to expand on the pro-life. John, you have some thoughts on that.
Well, again, I would just say if you look at the most recent polling, this is very similar to what we've seen in prior election cycles, which is that sort of the notion that Latinos are values voters here in Nevada is just not borne out by the data, unfortunately. So I would respectfully disagree just from the standpoint of what the data are suggesting. On abortion, the two most recent polls show overwhelming majority of Latino disagree with the most recent Supreme Court decision, want abortion to be legal. In terms of issues, values issues, so to speak, have never shown up as being salient, and they're not showing up really in the most recent cycle, except on abortion. And then when they probe that issue, it's in a way that suggests that people want abortion to be legal and really strongly disagree, regardless of their own personal beliefs. So I don't know that these are going to motivate people in a way that people might think. And again, I just keep coming back to the economy. I think for Latinos, these are really going to be the critical issues, or which party is perceived in candidate being better on the economy, and it will come down to jobs, I think, and inflation.
Jose, I know you want to jump in. I hope you're going to say immigration has historically been an issue among...
Historically, immigration has been an issue. It's an issue that hasn't been resolved on the national level for over 30 years. So you have businesses that are employing undocumented immigrants at very low pay, and that continues to go on. We need to fix that. So both parties need to come together like they did 30 years ago and fix that. I want to go back a little bit to education, because that's key and critical to the Latino population. I was the first Latino to serve on the Clark County School Board back in '92, '93. And ever since then, I've had my foot on education, mostly in the background. But education is what the families are looking for. Education, a proper education, good job opportunities. This is what the Latino community is looking for. Hey, I'm a Catholic myself. I live my faith, okay? But the Catholics I talk to, they want a leader that looks like, that looks like them, feels like them, and that and the values is what they do, not what they say. So the values that we're looking for as far as Latinos is which party, which candidate are going to give us the job opportunities that are going to help us support our families and have a bright future. I have a granddaughter. I have 3 granddaughters, 4 actually now. And I want their future to be bright. So the party that helps my grandkids are the party that I'm going to support. But if neither one of them are doing it, I'm going to be in the background doing all I can, like I did for Steve Wilson when he ran in the primary.
I want to wrap up with this because we have ran out of time. We've referred to the Pew Research Center a lot in this broadcast, and in one of their reports on the 2020 election, there was this quote: "To be sure, Hispanic voters are not a monolith. There is substantial diversity within the Hispanic electorate."